Namaskar. Welcome to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. This edition of the India Foundation podcast features the Tithi Shastra, the date debate. This episode comprises of speakers like Mr. Kom Carpentier, consultant at India Foundation, Dr. Munish Pandit, independent scholar, Shri K.K. Ramamurthy, independent scholar, and Shri Ashok Bhatnagar, independent scholar. Let's begin.
First, we have noticed that astronomical and astrological calculations are complex and based on verses which might be open to some controversy. They can lead to different results. Now, obviously, this is not going to be something that can be resolved to everybody's satisfaction in the foreseeable future. Discussions will have to continue, and there will have to be more and more convergence between astrology and the other sciences that are concerned with the study of the past, in particular, of course, archaeology, but also epigraphy and oceanography, climatology, and several other natural and human sciences. Now, the question is that there are a few basic dates that there are no reasons to dispute in Indian history. For example, Megasthenes reports that he was told the first Indian king, who was Dionysos, according to Greek interpretation, ruled in 6776 BCE, which essentially means that you are looking at 9,000 years of recorded chronological dynastic history, which was accepted and which, by the way, was completely normal, because most of the civilizations, BCE, were completely aware of having very long histories behind them, hundreds of thousands of years in the case of the Babylonians or Egyptians. If you look at the first semi-historical Egyptian pharaoh, Narmer or Orhaha or Menes, Manu, because Menes is a Greek spelling with added vowels. You also see originally he was placed around 7,000 BCE, then he was brought down to about 3,500 BCE. And then if you look at the Mayans, you see that their long count calendar begins on 3,114 BCE, for a reason which is very interesting, because it shows that there is an awareness of a great beginning or new beginning around that time, which is precisely the traditional date according to Aryabhatiya, at least for the Kali Yuga and for the Mahabharata. Take or leave a few decades. So clearly something was happening in the world, or did happen in the world at that time, which was remembered for a very, very long time. Now, obviously, that can be questioned on grounds of archaeology, as Sri Rajesh Lal has reminded us. But then again, archaeology is a very imprecise science. Many of our dates have to be revised. And we know that many essentially chronological assumptions based on carbon-14 method or potassium-argon method and others can be highly, highly misleading. Now, we also have this problem which came up with the rise of what we might call Middle Eastern Western archaeology based on the Bible, which essentially calculated that since the traditional date for the beginning of the world was about 4,000 BCE, take or leave a few years, nothing much could have happened before 3,000 BCE. And this led to this very bizarre assumption that everything begins in the Middle East, somewhere between Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, and therefore everything that comes has to be in the rest of the world has to be posterior. I think we have to get well past that, because that's essentially unsustainable. So there is absolutely no question that there are major problems. We know the Buddha's chronology is one of the biggest problems, because you are not going to get easily the international scientific, academic community to accept that Siddhartha Gautama Buddha is so much older than they have decided once and for all. And as you know, even the Dalai Lama pretty much accepts the essentially classical academic chronology. Then you have the problems tied to, again, Ashoka, the Mauryas. Are the Mauryas mixed up sometimes with later dynasties? That is a problem which has been hotly debated, because then you could assume that Chandragupta was not one of the kings who is regarded to be Chandragupta Maurya, might actually have been Mauryas may have been much earlier than that. And so it leads to a massive reconsideration, which will be very hard to bring about. And the reason I'm saying that is that we are discussing about how to establish Indian correct chronology for textbooks. And it won't be easy for any government body to decide to essentially reject Western chronologies. Somebody has mentioned the traditional chronology for Sri Shankaracharya, Adi Shankara, which of course is again more than 1,000 years anterior to the currently accepted dates for Sri Shankaracharya. So how are you going to do that? And of course, it's much more tempting to just settle for the period which is defended by archaeologists, or even for the period which is being defined by researchers such as Sri Bhatnagar or Sri Ramamurthy, which is much more in consonance with our current schemes about world history. However, I would like to point out that there is no doubt that the deeper we dig, the more things we find. And now we know that powerful and sophisticated civilizations existed 10, 12, 13, 14,000 years ago. One good example is Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, which is about 9 to 10,000 years ago. There are some very credible reasons to believe that the Sphinx of Gizeh is about 12,000 years old. So you see, there is no reason to be shy about it. This is not a matter of being a sort of Hindu chauvinist saffron historian, because you are not saying that India was the only country which had a history going back 10,000 years to the Dryas period, the lower Dryas. You are actually able to recognize that the whole world, and in many parts of the world, had civilizations going back very far into the past. So it's not a matter of claiming greater antiquity than others. And so I think that's where we have to keep our minds open, keep the research going. And as we make new discoveries like the Sanoli archaeological find in Uttar Pradesh, we see that there is a real possibility that the Mahabharata could be much older than has been assumed by most archaeologists, beginning with Dr. B.B. Lal. Now, we have the problem of the chronologies, of the Puranic chronologies, of the Puranic dynasties. That is still not entirely solved. So I think, we can certainly, I think, try to provide at least two alternative versions to be taught to students by telling them that this is where research is, and there are elements in favor of both possibilities. And as more research is being done, more accuracy may be gained. But meanwhile, at least this takes them away from the current view, which is that basically Mahabharata and Ramayana are caveats. They are poems, they are not real, they are about mythology, so there is no reason to be worried because basically they, who knows, nothing ever happened, or if it happened, it was a much smaller thing and it didn't take place so long ago. So once we are able to remove that prejudice, I think we will already have done taken an important step in the process of rediscovering ancient Indian history and its real antiquity. So on that basis, I will thank all participants and all.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share my screen straight away without much ado. So I'm going to be going on 3067 BC, which is the date of the Mahabharata war, as per me. Right. So what we are deriving it from, we are dating the Mahabharata as per Maghamasa for Bhishma Moksha, based on 2 verses of Anushasan Parva and Gita Press version, which cannot be below 2.2K BC or above 3.2K BC. We are giving the Burkle crater at around 3K BC circa for sinking of Dwarka. The astronomy is based on the triangulation of Saturn's position, resolving all the positions of Saturn, Mars position and retrogression in the year, along with the eclipse season. The lunar must be at Kartika Purnima. Then there must be a solar eclipse, if there is, at Jyeshtha Amavasya before the war. And Jupiter must cause Nakshatra Pida to Rohini Nakshatra, not Rashi Pida. Bhishma Moksha is completely independent thing, and that must be on the 4th day post winter solstice on Magha Shukla Ashtami on Rohini Nakshatra. And then scientific Buddha Nirvana theory, which pushes Buddha to 1300 years back, which is prior to so that comes to 1807 BC for the Nirvana. This particular 3067 BC theory is my modified proposal, slightly different from Dr. Achar's. Is the only date which is based on the internal consistency of the 4 timelines, explaining the astronomy of Karna's death, the planetary positions, cometary phenomena with paths, and giving a hypothesis for the telescopic visualization. It is based on the 3 Pushya theory, 3 Pushyas which are occurring. The moon phases, moon rises, everything from the start of the of Krishna's mission of peace right up to Bhishma Moksha, everything is explained. It has got an explanation for Arundhati Vashisht. It has got Nakshatra, Jyotisha explanations, as we have already talked about. This is something about how this exactly, this 3 timelines, which I'm showing over here, and a 4th timeline, which I'll show in a moment. These are how it looks like. So you've got basically Balrama's pilgrimage timeline, which must start on a Pushya, which must end on a Shravana Nakshatra, which starts in our case on 1st of November on a Guru Pushya yoga, which is the most auspicious sort of muhurta of the entire of Indian history. And it must end on a Shravana Nakshatra on a Amavasya. In the middle, you have got to show the 14th night waning phase, crescent moon, moonrise, and that must be visible. If that is invisible, then that theory fails. So we are showing all those things along with the war timeline. We are that if the war is starting on a particular nakshatra, then where must it end on? And all those sort of things we are sorting out. Theory on Bhishma death, 5 conditions. The day has to be on the 4th day from the day of winter solstice, not on the 1st day, not on the 2nd, not on the 3rd. It must be on the 4th day. There are very clear reasons, scientific reasons. It has to be observed by the eye. So that must be at Uttarayana. There is a lunar month of Magha. It must be a Shuddha Shukla Ashtami, and the moon must be at Rohini, and that must occur at midday. This is an extremely stringent criteria. And the time interval must never be more than 58 nights spent by Bhishma till the day of Bhishma Nirvana. So 3067 BC satisfies all the 5 conditions. Why am I saying seen with the eye? Sa niryo gajapura dhyajike parivaritaha drishtva nivrittam adityam pravrittam chottarayanam. And the other verse, parivritto hi bhagavan sahasranshu divakarha. The 2 verses, verse 6 and 26, are pointing to observed winter solstice, which can never be on the 1st day. It is only on the 4th day. And on that day, you must have basically a Rohini nakshatra, which is occurring at noon. So, and there is a verse, Shukla Pakshasya Chashtamya Magha Masasya Parthiva Prajapatya Cha Nakshatre Madhyam Prapte Divakare. And of course, you all know about Maghoem Samanuk Prapto, that particular verse. So 2 verses gone there. I am already showing you over here winter solstice on 13th of January of 3066 BCE. And I am showing you basically in a moment, which you can see over here. You can clearly see the moon, which is there between the 2 limbs over there. And that is at Aldebaran Rohini Nakshatra on 4th day after winter solstice, so 17th of Jan. So that is Bhishma Moksha done. Timeline of war versus pilgrimage, they are linked indelibly, both timelines. If one timeline fails, other timeline also fails. Stringent criteria, 60 plus verses of Drona Parva, chapter 161, critical edition. It must end on Amavasya, it must begin, and that must end on a Shravana Nakshatra, coinciding with Balrama's return. Therefore, war can only start in late Shukla Pakshas, S13 or 14. It can never start on Amavasya. If it starts on Amavasya, it fails. That theory fails. Last day is a Shravana Nakshatra. War must start on either Rohini or Mrigashira Nakshatra. This is basic mathematics. All this, whatever I'm talking, is basic maths. It's not very, very complicated. Last day of the pilgrimage is Shravana Nakshatra, and the pilgrimage must start on a Pushya Nakshatra always. It must not have reverse Nakshatras, because Pushya Nakshatra is the most auspicious Nakshatra of the zodiac. Plus, it must be a Guru Pushya Yoga, ideally, if possible. That we are having. It must take 42 days. This is something about how it will look like. I'm showing you x-axis and y-axis over here. X-axis the pilgrimage, y-axis the 18 days of the war. And in the middle of that, you must have that 14th night, waning phase, crescent moon rise. Right. There is the particular verse in case anybody wants to look at the verse, exactly what the verse is. And as far as I remember, we are the only people proving Balrama's pilgrimage and Bhishma Moksha rigidly according to these criteria. Right. Then we are talking about the late night crescent moonrise. People always ask why the war cannot start on Amavasya. Tata kumudanathena kamini ganda panduna netranandena chandrena mahindri digalankarta. Verse 42, chapter 159 of Drona Parva. Nobody can contradict this particular verse. It is an eastern sky moonrise in the waning phase. It fits really well with it being late at night. Therefore, there can never be in the waxing phase. It's as simple as that. This is a waning phase, crescent moonrise. So therefore, the last day of the war, and there are other verses which are pointing to it being Amavasya, but what I'm saying is the last day of the war can be Amavasya or close to it. Right. And well, okay, I will leave all this because I think I will be running out of time otherwise. So the moonrise must be visible in any war theory. If that particular war night, 14th war night, becomes Amavasya, your war timeline, first of all, it cannot start on Amavasya. And if that 14th war night is Amavasya, then also there is a problem. So it becomes an invisible moonrise. So a lot of theories fail. We are showing you moon phases right from the mission of peace. There's just a snapshot of that. Right up to Bhishma Moksha, we can show you all the moon phases perfectly and fitting with 3 pushyas. First pushya of refusal of peace terms by Duryodhan. Second pushya is the pushya which is Guru pushya of Balrama's start. Third pushya which is occurring in the war timeline. Here I'm showing you just cross-checking. I'm showing you that it is ending on a Amavasya and on a Shravana Nakshatra on the 12th of December, exactly as the text is saying. Here I'm sort of showing you the timeline of Krishna's mission of peace, first revolution to Pushya. So you can see on the left hand of the screen, Krishna starts on a Revati Nakshatra, Kartik Masa, halts at Vrikasthala. We are showing you the first lunar eclipse, Kartik Purnima, then the peace talks are failing, then Karna Krishna Samvada is occurring, Saptamacha Vidivasad Amavasya Bhavishyati, that particular verse is being spoken over there. Then you are getting Amavasya, solar eclipse at Nakshatra ruled by Shakra, which is basically Jyeshtha Nakshatra, Jyeshtha Amavasya, then a short lunar fortnight followed by Purnima, that is the Purnima, and the second lunar eclipse at Mrigashira Nakshatra, and then you go to the next Pushya, Balrama starts. So eclipses must be before the war, the lunar eclipse must be first at Kartika Purnima, and that is again given in these particular verses. Somasya Lakshma Vyavrittam Rahurarkam Upeshyati. And I don't need to give this any further. I think all of you are familiar with it. We are corroborating 2 sets of 3 eclipses each. And those are the eclipses which are occurring during the, so just before the war is occurring, September 29th, October 14th, October 28th. All 3 eclipses we are proving in an eclipse season. We are proving the next set of eclipses also, APARVANI and solar eclipse, 36 years later at the Yadava Civil War, 3031 BCE. So that is October 20th, November 5th, and November 19th. We are showing you all those eclipses. Then what about the planetary positions? All the alternative verses must be resolved. So we have got over here Saturn, which I am sorry to say that no astronomy data has taken Saturn at Rohini, which is given in 2 different parvas, in 2 different verses, in 2 different books of the Mahabharata, basically by 2 important characters. Prajavatyam hi nakshatram grahas tikshno mahadyati shaneshchara pidayati pidayan prananodikam, that is Udyoga Parva 141. And then Rohini pidayan nesham sthito rajan shaneshchara, which is from Bhishma Parva chapter 2. So those 2 verses, basically, we are saying that Saturn is at Rohini, but we are also resolving the other 2 verses. Basically, we are giving an academic ranking index for Saturn's position.
One more minute.
Thank you. And so that can be also found in my book. You can read, I mean, there's an entire chapter on each and every Graha position. And then what about this particular verse, which is given by most people? A lot of Mahabharata daters take this to mean Saturn is at Vishakha Nakshatra. We are resolving it as Comet Soha and Comet Blancpain. And we are giving the theory for visualization also. And why are we saying they are comets? Graho Tamrano Shikhau Prajwalita Vubhau Sthitau. So that is pretty straightforward. And Saptarshi Udaranam Samochchadya Prabham. So Jupiter and Saturn are never going to obscure or penetrate the Saptarshis. It was only got to be comets which are going to do it. Same way. So that way we are giving Saturn at Rohini. What about planetary position Mars? Kritva Changarako Vakram Jyesthaya Madhusura. There are only 2 basic verses for Mars. And if anybody is showing that Mars is at Vakri at Magha, then they must show Jupiter Vakri at Shravana. And of course, that is an impossible thing to happen astronomy wise. So Jupiter must be, so Mars must be retrograde in the year of the war. And it must not be Vakri at the same time as the Jyeshtha Amavasya. It is much before. and must be Vakri prior to reaching Jyeshtha Anuradha. So this we are also showing. And there it is. Basically, we can show that particular thing happening over there. We must resolve all the ambiguous Graha positions. We have done that by taking a speculative index for all the ambiguous Graha positions, Lohitango and all those sort of Pavaka Pravaha, Dhruva, Parusha, and all the other things which a lot of people have speculated about. We have resolved all those positions. And this is Bhishma timeline. How are we doing for time?
I think you should wrap up because you have gone over 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. I think I will just say that did Kali Yuga occur during the Mahabharata war? Our theory is reliant on Kali Yuga, but here is a particular verse which is saying clearly that Kali Yuga is actually starting at the time, has already started at the time of the Gada Yuddha Parva. With that, I will wrap up my presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to defend the date of 1504 BCE. And let me get straight on to presentation since the time is short. I'll be going 3 sections here. First, comparing 1504 BCE with the 3 other dates which the previous presenters presented, with very high level, slow moving markers from Udyoga Parva, War Parvas, and Anushasana Parva. Then after that, I'll go into some details of the evidences to back 1504 BC, and also talk about some assumptions. And these assumptions, I have to be clear that it is not an attempt to force fit in 1504 BC, but it is to reconcile internal contradictions when we take conventional meanings of these evidences. So 2 evidences contradict themselves regardless of whichever year it is. And these assumptions are trying to explain them. So let me get on to the presentation here. This is a quick slide. I just want, it's an eye chart here, but what I wanted to show was I considered all the dates from Sri Krishna leaving for a diplomatic mission to Bhishma Nirvana, and I have listed all the dates from all the authors. Ashok Bhatnagarji gets 2 columns because he likes to give it in Gregorian, and I also converted to Julian so that it compares with others who have used Julian dates. And we can come back to this if there is any questions. Let me go to the next slide. So summary, when we compare all these dates here, so when we take the precession of equinox, which is the slowest moving dates, here the assumption is everyone is familiar with everyone's work. So I'm just jumping into the comparison. Autumnal equinox and Sri Krishna's diplomatic mission, it says Sharadante Himagame. So it needs to happen on or after autumnal equinox. And Ashok Bhatnagarji in his paper has described very well why the 3K dates won't fit in that. And you can see that they are 20 days earlier. And Ashok Bhatnagarji's is 3 days later, which fits well. And 1504 BC is close second. It's 10 days earlier. Balarama's journey, it has to align with the war dates, and 3163 and 1793 they do not align. They give a theory that instead of starting at Pushya, they should have they might have started in Shravana and ended in Pushya. But when you look at the date of what they suggest, starting at Shravana, it's actually even before Sri Krishna leaves for diplomatic mission, which is inconsistent because we know that Sri Balarama leaves for a pilgrimage after Sri Krishna returns from Hastinapura. So clearly the pilgrimage doesn't fit with these 2 days. There is a theory that 3067 date comes up with. There are some logical faults to it. We'll come to that later, but right now let's just assume it aligns. And then finally the Anushasana Parva. So with 3K, so this is something that I'm contradicting these 2 authors, and I'll explain in next slide why it's actually what they consider as Magha is actually a Phalguna month. And with 1793 and 1504 BC, it falls in Magha month. And the nice thing is it's exactly 58 days, like as Bhishma says that he has been lying on the bed of arrows. since day 10 of war, and the winter solstice exactly aligns for both these dates. So let me quickly go to this controversial thing why I say it's Falguna. Both of them introduce Adhika Masa to explain. And here's a list of full moon dates for 3163 BCE and 3067 BCE. And you see that full moon at Kritika, it's Kartika month, Mrigashira, Margashisha month, it aligns very well. And once they introduce this Adhika Masa, all of a sudden when full moon happens in Magha, instead of Magha, they call it Pushya. And here when it is at Falguni, instead of month Falguna, they say is month. And error continues going forward. You take the next full moon, instead of Chitra, it's say Falguna, and when the full moon is at Vaishaka, they have to call it Chitra. When it is at Jeshta, they have to call it Vaishaka, and the error just propagates. So rather than introducing Adhika Masa unnecessarily to force fit Bhishma Nirvana date into Magha, it's just Falguna month, and that's a big drawback of 3K. And Ashok Bhatnagar explains why when we go that far in 3K, it's very hard for winter solstice to fall in Magha Masa. Let me go further. I won't be able to go through all the evidences to back 1504 BC, but I do want to talk about the assumptions because this would come up in later debates. In Udyoga Parva, most of the evidence fits pretty well with 1504 BC. There is an internal contradiction when Krishna's journey with Karna happened. So there is three events. Duryodhana, after the talks fails, he says Pushya is an ascendant, and he declares war. He wants, and Sri Krishna and Pandavas, they leave. Sri Krishna meets Pandavas, and they decide to leave on Pushya. And Sri Balarama's pilgrimage also starts on Pushya. So clearly, Sri Krishna has rushed back from Hastinapura back to Upaplavya to give the news to Pandavas and urge them to war. So the event happened on Pushya, but then there is a prediction where Sri Krishna tells to Karna that in 7 days there's going to be Amavasya and Jeshta, and clearly in 7 days you cannot travel from moon cannot travel from Pushya to Jeshta. So there's an internal contradiction. This is my first assumption. Observation is greater than prediction. Here it's reasonable that ancients did not have all the tools to make great predictions. So whenever we have a conflicting one, let's take observation. I give another example where this is the case, where 56 days somewhere after day of war is predicted to be winter solstice, whereas Bhishma says 58 days. He has been laying on the bed of arrows. Due to time, I won't go into that. But let me talk about this Pushya thing again. So Duryodhana is making an observation that Pushya is an ascendant. Sri Krishna is and Balarama is making an observation that they are leaving Pushya. So we should take the observation rather than the prediction. And there's a theory in 3067 that there is a month gap between Duryodhana declaring war and Sri Krishna and Pandavas deciding to go to war. Clearly, that's a very bad war strategy. When the opponent is already preparing for war, you are still debating for a month whether to go on a war. So logically, that doesn't make much sense. So let's go to the war parvas. Again, I talk about all the evidences, how they line up. Lack of time, I won't go into them. But then I do have to mention, before I go to my assumption too, I do take Saturn is at Rohini, and there are multiple references to it. But there is one of reference where it says Saturn at Bhaga, which is Uttara Palguni, and that is a assumption too. And there is a second one where it says Saturn at Vishaka, and which I'll explain in the assumption 3. Assumption 2, Graha as a needle of clock. So when there are two internal contradictions where multiple positions of Saturn is mentioned, so I pick the one where Saturn is mentioned more, which is at Rohini, and then I assume that the ancients saw the nakshatras as needles of a clock. So when they say Saturn is at Bhaga or Uttara Phalguni, they are talking to a previous year. So I go back to the previous year where Saturn was in Uttara Palguni, which is 1526 BC, and it's not mentioned in isolation. It's mentioned along with Jupiter retrograding in Shravana, Mars at Magha, and Venus retrograding at Bhadrapada. So, and all of that fit in 1526 BC. So it kind of validates this assumption that when they are talking about a different Saturn position, they are referring to a previous year. Um, and then the Anushasana Parva. Um, here, let me jump to the famous one where Bhishma says it's Magha, Tribhaga Shesha, and Shukla Paksha. And then I also want to mention that 36 years later, you get another eclipse at Kartika, which matches with the evidence over there. So here we need to be careful. There is an internal contradiction. It's not quite apparent, but there's an internal contradiction. I'll come to that in a second. But before that, let me talk about these one-off terms where Jupiter and Saturn and Vishaka, and several authors have shown that Jupiter can never be for 1 year at Vishaka, which makes sense. We need an alternative explanation. So we know that Vishaka had an older name called Radha, and the star following that was called Anuradha because it followed Radha. So we have to probably look at an alternative meaning for Vishaka. And the unique thing is Vishaka, this is where it's only mentioned in Mahabharata, and it means forking. So my alternate meaning is, could it mean horizon? Because that's where the heaven and earth forks. And in 1504 BCE, and that does happen, Saturn and Jupiter are opposite ends of the horizon, and it's like that for one whole year. So that makes sense. And then to the Bhishma Nirvana. So this is an apparent internal contradiction. If we take Magha Shukla Ashtami as Bhishma Nirvana date from conventional meaning, it will never fit with Sri Balarama's Tirtha Yatra. That's why the authors have struggled how to fit Balarama's Tirtha Yatra by taking it as Magha Shukla Ashtami. In 3067, they have Magha Shukla Ashtami. They try to fit Bhishma Tirtha Yatra, but one thing is they don't fit 58 days from day 10 of war. And Bhishma clearly says that he has been laying on the bed of arrows for 58 days, and it doesn't fit there. And they explain it by saying that probably Bhishma was having 58 sleepless nights, which brings us to like 4 days before the first day of war. And why he should have sleepless nights only 4 days before war? Why not 6 days? Why not 8 days? It doesn't make much sense. So clearly there is an internal contradiction, and it takes more time to explain why these two, if we take it as Magha Shukla Ashtami, it won't fit with Sri Balarama Sita Yatra and 58 days from day 10 of war. And
Don't
here,
worry.
yeah, I'm concluding here. So here what I take is Tribhaga Sheshaha, 1/3 of the month is left. So if 1/3 of the month is left, we are in Krishna Paksha. So the other interpretation is 3/4 of a month is left. So that brings us to Magh Shukla Ashtami. But here I take 1/3, so it's at Krishna Paksha. And Shukla, here I'm reinterpreting that it probably means the portion of Magha which falls in Uttarayan, which is what Bhishma is trying to refer as Shukla Paksha here. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Well, namaskar to all. I'm Ashok Bhatnagar. I'll straight away go to the presentation. Astronomical dating has been done in the past 2.5 by all these scholars listed here. The technique is very scientific, but it has its own hazards. Like all astronomical events, actually in nature are very cyclic, and if you choose incorrectly, you can always show a date corresponding to those events. A group of events, if the selection is scanty or unsystematic, then also it can show a wrong date. Further, the accuracy of the astronomical methods is reduced as we delve more and more into the past, and also interpolations and modifications to the texts which are so old also are not ruled out. There is evidence that they exist. And then, of course, is the question of personal biases. Uh, one second. Yeah. We made a study and published our results in the Indian Journal of the History of Science. It's available online. It's a Journal of Indian National Science Academy. We have made use of 52 verses from 10 parvas, and we have used latest computations, and also we actually believe that the date that we provide has an accuracy of plus minus 1 day, for the reasons I'll give you next. This before we proceed further, I would like to explain the phenomenon of movement of through the Indian zodiac. This is the Indian zodiac of 27 nakshatras, and here the winter solstice is shown when in 285 AD. It has, and its position today is here. It takes 26,000 years to move in opposite direction and makes one full circle. This is the full zodiac. So now in our investigation, we have used Vedanga Jyotish calendar, which was also explained yesterday by Shri Vedveer Arya. And here, this shows the intercalation that has been done in one of the shloks of Mahabharata, that this is actually corresponding to the calendar that was made in Vedanga Jyotish. So, and Vedanga Jyotish itself mentions the location of winter solstice in the nakshatra, which corresponds to Beta Delphini, and that next this thing we pick up the next references of the seasons that were prevalent, and the nakshatras and the moon's phase from two of these events. One is corresponding to the autumn equinox, and the other corresponds to Bhishma's demise on winter solstice. And both these consistently provide us with a time window of 2250 to 1280 BCE, that we, according to us, the observations that we have picked up should not fall outside this window. And then after this, we look for other astronomical events which occurred during this window, and we find reference to a pair of eclipses. And during this 970 years, we found 75 such eclipse pairs that occurred over northern India. And out of these, only one eclipse pair satisfies the condition that the year in which it occurs should have the winter solstice occurring on Marg Shukla Ashtami. And that year happens to be, according to simulations, 1793 BC. And it is confirmed by another shlok that this one about lunar eclipse that follows. So that year also comes out as 1793. So once we fix this year, all other events mentioned which relate to the characters in the epic, and also the beginning of war, they accurately reproduce without even explaining that it would have taken 3 days more for the this thing to be visible. We go strictly by the statement given in the epic. For whatever reason, they have given quite accurately, and it matches 41 the planets that because even P.C. Sengupta in his work in 1940s, he has given this that the planets were used entirely for astrological omens and all that. So whether they were actually observed or not, but we have tried to invoke the astrological considerations through Brihad Jatika of Varahamihir, which is of course a much later thing, but it's even today it is being followed.
And so we applied those rules back to the nakshatras then, and most of the things except Venus could be explained. Now we have also done studies and why connection with 3102 BCE as Kali Yuga is untenable. We have also shown in our paper reasons that nakshatra of Balram's pilgrimage apply only in reverse order, that he leaves in Shravan and comes back in Pushya. Crescent moon on 14th day of war is also untenable, because this gives a date along with the combination of other observations available as more than 5,000 years before BC. And then location of Venus that is given there is also astronomically not possible. It is shown as 100 degrees away from the sun. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. Do like, share, and subscribe the India Foundation channel.